There's a question that lingers in the hearts of so many who long for a just world. Why does evil seem to prosper while goodness fights an uphill battle? We see it in history, in politics, in business, even in our own relationships. Those who lie, manipulate, and exploit others often seem to rise to the top, while those who walk in honesty and kindness face resistance, setbacks, and heartache. It's frustrating, it's disheartening, and at times it makes us wonder if doing the right thing even matters. One of the hardest truths to accept is that evil often plays by different rules. It doesn't concern itself with fairness, integrity, or compassion. It moves with aggression, seeking power without restraint. Goodness, on the other hand, is bound by principles. It values honesty over advantage, kindness over conquest. And because of that, it often appears slower, weaker, even naive. But is it really? Or is there something deeper happening beneath the surface? When we look at history, we see countless examples of tyrants, oppressors, and corrupt leaders thriving while the righteous suffer. But what we often forget is that their success is temporary. History has a way of exposing and dismantling injustice. The truth, though often buried for a time, always has a way of rising. Goodness may not always win quickly, but it wins in ways that last. Evil, by its very nature, is unsustainable. It destroys itself from within. Greed leads to ruin, lies collapse under their own weight, and cruelty breeds rebellion. But let's be honest, knowing this doesn't always make it easier to watch injustice unfold in real time. When we see people getting ahead by stepping on others, it shakes our faith in fairness. It's in these moments that we must remind ourselves that the fight for goodness isn't about quick victories. It's about endurance. It's about refusing to let corruption change who we are. The struggle of goodness isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that it's playing the long game. Think about the people who have left the greatest impact on the world. Were they the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most feared? No. They were the ones who stood for something greater than themselves, the ones who endured suffering but didn't let it harden them, the ones who chose integrity over ease. Their influence lasts because it was built on something real, something unshakable. Evil may look strong, but its victories are hollow. Its foundation is weak. Another reason wrongdoing seems to succeed is that it often thrives in the shadows. It depends on silence, on people looking the other way. But the moment we acknowledge it, name it, and challenge it, its power begins to weaken. This is why courage is so important. Courage doesn't mean we never feel afraid. It means we don't let fear stop us from doing what's right. And when we choose courage over comfort, we begin to shift the balance. So what do we do when injustice seems to be winning? We hold on to the truth that goodness isn't about immediate success, it's about endurance. We remember that doing the right thing isn't just about the outcome, it's about the person we become in the process. We refuse to let darkness dictate who we are, and most importantly, we remind ourselves that even when we can't see the results, every act of integrity, every moment of kindness, and every choice to stand for what's right plants a seed that will grow in ways we may never fully understand. There's a saying that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. It's not just a powerful quote, it's a sobering reality. When we witness wrongdoing but hesitate to speak, when we know something is unjust but convince ourselves it's not our place to interfere, we become unintentional accomplices to the very things we despise. Silence, though often mistaken for neutrality, is never neutral. It either upholds justice or allows oppression to flourish. Fear is the great silencer. We fear the consequences of speaking up, what people will think, how it might disrupt our relationships, whether it will cost us something we're not willing to lose. Maybe we fear confrontation, or maybe we doubt our own ability to make a difference. So we rationalize our silence. Someone else will handle it. It's not my business. What if I get it wrong? And just like that, evil tightens its grip, not because it is unstoppable, but because it is unchallenged. Throughout history, some of the greatest tragedies weren't just the result of evil people doing evil things. They were the result of good people looking away, staying silent, or convincing themselves it wasn't their fight. Oppression, corruption, abuse, and cruelty thrive in the space that silence creates. The most dangerous part about inaction is that over time, it numbs us. The more we ignore injustice, the easier it becomes to live with it. And before we know it, we've made peace with something that should have never been tolerated. But let's be honest, speaking up is hard. It requires discomfort. It demands courage. And sometimes it costs us something. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the cost of our silence? When we choose comfort over conviction, we allow harm to continue. When we avoid the hard conversations, we leave room for deception to spread. When we fail to hold people accountable, we give power to those who misuse it. Silence is not just passive, it is permission. Now, I'm not saying we all need to be loud and confrontational. Confronting evil doesn't always mean making grand gestures or public declarations. Sometimes it's the quiet but firm refusal to go along with what is wrong. It's the decision to stand with the vulnerable instead of siding with the powerful. It's choosing truth even when it's unpopular. And it's understanding that courage isn't about the absence of fear, it's about acting despite it. Fear tricks us into thinking we are alone. It tells us that our voice won't make a difference. But history has proven otherwise. Every great movement for justice, every shift toward a better world started with someone who refused to stay silent. It started with someone who chose to say enough. And the moment one person speaks, others find their courage too. That is how change begins. So the real question is not whether evil will continue to exist. It will. The real question is whether we will be the kind of people who challenge it, whether we will choose to be voices of truth in a world that would rather look away, whether we will lean into the discomfort of doing what's right instead of settling for the ease of silence. It's not about being fearless. It's about refusing to let fear be the reason we do nothing. Because at the end of the day, silence is a choice. And every time we choose to speak, every time we confront injustice instead of turning away, we shrink the space where evil can grow. We may not stop it all at once, but we take away its greatest weapon, our silence. Power is one of the greatest tests of character. It has the ability to magnify everything that already exists within a person, whether that be integrity and wisdom or greed and cruelty. We often wonder why those in power so frequently abuse it, why leaders who start with good intentions can so easily drift into corruption. The truth is, power itself is not inherently evil, but it is dangerously seductive. It reveals who we are at our core, stripping away pretense and exposing our deepest desires and fears. At its best, power can be used to serve, protect, and uplift others, but at its worst, it becomes a tool for self-preservation and control. Those who crave power for its own sake rarely do so with the intention of helping others. Instead, they seek to dominate, to accumulate more influence, to insulate themselves from accountability. And the moment power becomes more about maintaining control than about serving others, corruption takes root. One of the reasons power so often leads to greed and cruelty is that it creates distance. The more power a person has, the further removed they become from the struggles of ordinary people. They stop seeing individuals with needs, fears, and dreams. Instead, they see numbers, statistics, obstacles. This detachment makes it easier to justify decisions that harm others. The suffering of those below them becomes an abstraction, something to be managed rather than something to be felt. Another dangerous effect of power is the illusion of invincibility. Those who rise to positions of authority often start to believe that the rules no longer apply to them. They surround themselves with people who tell them what they want to hear, who reinforce their decisions instead of challenging them. This isolation breeds arrogance, and arrogance leads to reckless decision-making. When no one is holding a leader accountable, corruption is no longer just a possibility, it becomes inevitable. But let's be clear, power itself does not corrupt. It merely amplifies what is already present. A person with integrity, when given power, will use it to build, to protect, to serve. A person ruled by selfishness will use it to take, to exploit, to destroy. This is why the true test of leadership isn't how someone handles power when they first receive it, it's how they wield it over time. When the temptation to prioritize themselves over others becomes overwhelming. We see this not only in politics and business, but in everyday life. A manager who abuses their employees, a teacher who humiliates students instead of guiding them, a parent who uses authority to control rather than nurture. All of these are examples of power being misused. Corruption doesn't begin at the top. It begins in small moments, in small compromises, in small choices to prioritize self-interest over justice. Given enough time and opportunity, these small choices grow into something much darker. So how do we resist the corrupting influence of power? By remembering that true leadership is about responsibility, not privilege. By choosing humility over entitlement. By surrounding ourselves with people who will challenge us, hold us accountable, and remind us of the purpose behind the power we hold. And most importantly, by refusing to believe the lie that power is about status, it is and always has been about service. Because in the end, power will always reveal the truth about a person. It is not a measure of strength, but of character. And those who use it for greed and cruelty may seem to thrive for a time, but history has shown us that corruption is never sustainable. Sooner or later, it crumbles under its own weight. The real legacy of a leader is not found in how much power they held, but in how they used it. Courage is often misunderstood. We imagine it as something reserved for heroes, for those who stand on grand stages or lead historic movements. But courage is not about being fearless. It's about acting despite fear. It's about choosing to speak up when silence would be easier, to take a stand when sitting back would be more comfortable. And when it comes to injustice, courage is the single most powerful force that can break the cycles of oppression, deception, and harm that have been allowed to persist for too long. Why does speaking up matter? Because injustice thrives in silence. When people look away, when they avoid uncomfortable conversations, when they hesitate to challenge what they know is wrong, they create the very conditions that allow injustice to grow. Every moment of silence is a gift to those who benefit from wrongdoing. But every act of courage, no matter how small, chips away at the foundation of that injustice. It introduces truth where there was once only deception. And truth has a way of unraveling lies, no matter how tightly woven they seem. Yet courage is rarely convenient. It asks us to risk something, our comfort, our reputation, sometimes even our safety. It asks us to be willing to stand alone, to face resistance, to endure criticism. And that's why so many people hesitate. They tell themselves it's not their fight, that someone else will speak up. But history has shown us that waiting for someone else to act is the very reason injustice lasts as long as it does. Think about the voices that have changed the world. Not just the famous ones, but the everyday people who refuse to stay silent. The employee who exposed corruption in their company, the student who challenged unfair policies, the friend who stood up to a bully. These acts of courage may not make headlines, but they are just as important because they disrupt cycles of wrongdoing in the spaces where they take place. They send a message that injustice will not go unchallenged. But let's be real, courage is exhausting. It doesn't always lead to immediate change. Sometimes it feels like it makes no difference at all. But that's the tricky thing about speaking up. The impact isn't always visible right away. Courage plants seeds, it inspires others, it shifts conversations, and even when it feels like nothing is changing, it is. The mere act of challenging injustice weakens its hold, even if only slightly. Over time, those cracks in the system begin to spread. Courage is also contagious. When one person speaks up, it emboldens others to do the same. Fear tells us we are alone, but courage reminds us that we are not. Injustice is upheld not just by the powerful, but by the collective silence of those who feel powerless. The moment that silence is broken, the illusion of power starts to fade. Those who abuse power count on the fact that people will be too afraid to challenge them. When people start to resist, when they refuse to be intimidated, the dynamic shifts. So how do we cultivate courage? By remembering that speaking up is not about being fearless, it's about being willing. It's about trusting that even small acts of truth-telling matter. It's about deciding that our values are worth more than our comfort. And it's about recognizing that while courage may be difficult, the cost of staying silent is far greater. Because at the end of the day, courage is what writes history. It's what disrupts the cycles that were meant to continue. It's what brings injustice into the light and forces the world to reckon with it. And even when it feels like no one is listening, even when the odds feel stacked against us, we must remember this. No act of courage is ever wasted. Truth has a way of outlasting deception. And in the end, it is always the voices of the courageous that echo the loudest. In a world that often rewards shortcuts, deception, and self-interest, goodness can feel like a losing battle. We see people who cheat their way to success, who manipulate others for personal gain, who build their empires on lies, and they seem to thrive. Meanwhile, those who choose integrity, honesty, and kindness often face resistance. It's easy to wonder, does goodness even matter? Does truth really win in the end? The answer is yes, but not in the way we sometimes expect. Goodness plays the long game. It doesn't always deliver immediate rewards, but it builds something far more lasting, a foundation that cannot be shaken. Deception, on the other hand, is always temporary. It may look strong in the moment, but it is fundamentally weak. Lies require maintenance. Corruption demands cover-ups. The dishonest live in fear of being exposed, constantly working to protect the illusion they've created. And history has shown us time and time again that eventually the truth comes to light. Empires built on deception collapse. Fraud is uncovered. The powerful who misuse their influence are held accountable. The victories of deception are short-lived, but the impact of integrity lasts for generations. Think about the people who leave a lasting legacy. It's not the ones who amassed the most wealth or controlled the most people. It's the ones who stood for something greater than themselves. The leaders who chose truth over popularity. The individuals who held on to their values even when no one was watching. The people who treated others with kindness, not because it was easy, but because it was right. These are the ones whose influence endures. Because while deception fades, goodness builds something real. But let's be honest, choosing integrity isn't always easy. Sometimes it feels like doing the right thing comes at a cost. We may lose opportunities, friendships, or even our sense of security. Resisting corruption can feel lonely. Choosing honesty in a world that often rewards dishonesty can feel frustrating. But here's what we need to remember. Every act of integrity is an investment in something bigger than the moment we're in. It shapes our character, our relationships, and the kind of world we contribute to. The rewards of goodness may not come instantly, but they always come. Resilience is what sustains goodness in the face of opposition. Those who play the long game of goodness understand that setbacks are not the end of the story. They know that justice is not always immediate, that truth is sometimes drowned out by louder voices, but they keep going anyway. Why? Because they are driven by something deeper than personal gain. They are fueled by conviction, by the belief that even when it seems like no one is watching, their choices matter. And history proves them right again and again. It is the resilient, the ones who refuse to be swayed by greed, fear, or pressure who leave the greatest impact. It's tempting to believe that deception is powerful, but it only has power for as long as people believe in it. The moment deception is exposed, it crumbles. But truth Truth doesn't need to be maintained. It doesn't require manipulation or control. It simply exists, steady and unchanging. And while deception falls apart under scrutiny, truth only becomes stronger the more it is tested. That is why, no matter how long it takes, goodness will always outlast deceit. So how do we hold on to integrity when it feels like we're losing? We remind ourselves that our definition of success cannot be based on temporary wins. We choose to measure our lives not by what we gain, but by who we become. We lean into resilience, trusting that even when goodness goes unseen, it is never wasted. And we commit to playing the long game, knowing that while deception may take shortcuts, it never reaches the finish line intact. Because in the end, goodness wins. Not because it is loud, not because it is easy, but because it is real. Integrity, resilience, and truth create something that cannot be undone. They build legacies that deception can never touch. And while deception may shine for a moment, goodness is what lasts.